A solitary letter was received over half a century subsequent to one of the most heroic prison breaks in American history. Quiet, weathered, and unsigned it was. The assertion went beyond mere assertion. It posed a serious challenge to the narrative that had grown accustomed to regarding the individuals who vanished from Alcatraz in 1962. We now examine a letter that startled authorities and resurrected a long-forgotten case for the first time. There was deliberate sending of the document. Neither was it lost in the bay nor stashed away in a file. When is the best time? Could you please tell me why this message is contained here? If this is accurate, what else is being withheld? Not only could the contents alter the fate of a well-known escape novel, but they could also unlock an intentionally sealed door. Can you handle a more refined appearance? The initial reason for the letter's return is unclear. The true question is that. A startling communication. One of the most famous prison breaks in U.S. history occurred in June 1962 at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. A well-planned strategy was put into action over the period of several months by Clarence Anglin, John Anglin, and Frank Morris. In order to access a service passage, they fashioned homemade tools and cut through the cell walls. They climbed to the roof, skirted the jail's perimeter, and then fashioned a raft from raincoats, which they hurled into the frigid San Francisco Bay. All that remained when the authorities discovered their absence were a few convincingly lifelike prop heads stashed in their beds, serving as a means to stall the inevitable. Even though their remains were never discovered, the FBI concluded in 1979, after numerous searches, that the men had likely drowned. The public's interest in the case was reignited in 2013 when a letter questioning the long-held belief that the escapees had died was received by the San Francisco Police Department after more than 50 years. "My name is John Anglin." That was a powerful opening line. "Getting out of Alcatraz was my mission in June 1962. It was reported that the escape was successful and that all 3 men were rescued from the island without incident." The public and law enforcement were taken aback by this blatant inconsistency in the official narrative. Considering the abundance of sighting stories that had circulated regarding the case for decades, this became even more apparent. And the author, going by the pen name John Anglin, went deeply into his own life, which only served to bolster his narrative. He recounted the names of his fellow escapees and the news of their deaths. When asked about the years 2005 and 2008, he mentioned Frank Morris and Clarence Anglin as examples. Such statements had never been part of an inquiry or made public. This led many to believe that the writer had access to sensitive information that only an outsider could have. Among the places mentioned in the letter as possible homes for John in the decades following his escape were Seattle, North Dakota, and Southern California. Unfortunately, these assertions were not substantiated by any evidence. Next, the United States requested that the Federal Bureau of Investigations, FBI, conduct forensic examinations on the letter. Yes, protection for marshals. "We attempted to recover DNA and fingerprint data from the letter in addition to handwriting analysis. However, the outcomes were not definitive. This simply meant that confirming with certainty that the letter had come from John Anglin was not possible. However, it was far from being a forgery. It was still a watershed moment in the Alcatraz escape narrative when the letter arrived." Many people had long assumed the case was closed, but it sparked fresh debates about whether the men had actually died that night or had been alive in secret for decades. However, the letter did more than shock. It also made an even more terrifying offer. The last transaction, the letter's daring assertion of survival in 2013, shocked authorities, but the deeply personal plea within only served to heighten the complexity and terror of the situation. The letter's purported author, John Anglin, did more than merely recount a well-known escape. For what seemed like the final time, he begged for pardon. His health was deteriorating, he claimed, and he was 83 years old. He broke the news of his cancer diagnosis at this point. The letter lacked candor and had an impersonal, even guarded tone. Supposedly on the run for half a century, the man didn't merely confess, he negotiated. The writer made an unexpected but irresistible offer to the police. He would reveal his whereabouts in exchange for a formal promise to serve no more than a year in prison and to ensure that he received medical treatment. Someone with something to offer, not a scapegoat, was speaking in that voice. He appeared prepared to emerge from hiding, but only after decades of self-imposed exile. His condition necessitated medical attention, and he may have wished to have control over his final days rather than be simply a lost fugitive. What was intriguing about the statement was its tone, which was devoid of shame or fear. It smacked of strategic resolve. As a man accustomed to planning ahead, the author did not bow down or admit, but instead laid out the terms. Despite the lack of identification, the offer list contained enough private information to raise suspicion and keep the authorities on their toes. It was as if there was a greater untold story lurking beneath the surface, given the circumstances of coming out. Over the course of many years, careful preparation was likely required to evade various potential trails, create false identities, or discreetly enlist the aid of others. According to the FBI, the note's forensic analysis was unclear. Nevertheless, this invitation stands out as a captivating aspect of the contemporary account of the Alcatraz escape. An authentic letter would reveal the inner thoughts of a dying man, a wanted criminal who has evaded capture for decades but still wants a say in the story's ending. For 50 years, people have wondered what happened behind the scenes in 1962 and how this deathbed bargain was delivered. Whether the author was actually John Anglin or a fake with inside knowledge about the case, the impact on those people must have been devastating. Rare insight into the life of a wanted man following one of the most daring prison escapes in U.S. history was provided by a 2013 mystery letter sent to San Francisco police and believed to have been written by John Anglin. According to the letter, Anglin managed to evade capture for more than half a century after a perilous 1962 Alcatraz escape. According to the author, they had resided in multiple U.S. states undetected, beginning with an extended stint in Seattle, Washington. After his ordeal at Alcatraz, which seemed destined to end in the maximum security prison, he began a clandestine life. Rumor has it that Anglin spent 8 years in North Dakota following his stay in Seattle. The mention of North Dakota stands out, even though the letter didn't name any towns or provide specifics about his life at the time. Someone attempting to remain hidden would have found it to be an ideal location due to its remoteness, rural setting, and low population density. He was both agile and cautious, as evidenced by his transcontinental travels. He clearly lived in continual terror of being discovered, and he may have gotten away with it by using false identities or other individuals. If Anglin had written the letter, he would have claimed residence in the San Fernando Valley. He was vague about the location, but the site selection reveals a lot. Anyone attempting to remain undetected would do well to seek refuge in this heavily populated region, thanks to its size and diversity, which allow individuals to remain anonymous. Supporting his claim of being skilled in lying for decades, it appears more plausible that an FBI wanted man could have lived in a well-known area for years without being caught. While some of these locations may have been mentioned, officials never officially acknowledged them. Some people think that John Anglin ran away to one of many possible foreign locations, but if he did live, he didn't. This makes the escape story even more intriguing. He remained in the countryside where he blended in with the locals and went unnoticed. Particularly in the United States, these allegations have sparked a great deal of discussion and investigation. Although the FBI has closed the case, the matter is still being investigated by the U.S. Marshals Service. Whether or not the letter was genuine and intended to manipulate Anglin's mind is really irrelevant. That it depicted the essence of a quiet life, lived in a not-so-quiet way against all odds, was what really important. A terrifying verification of life. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely. This is the most chilling and impactful line from the alleged 2013 letter written by John Anglin. Based on those few lines, the letter might have been the initial piece of first-hand evidence that the infamous 1962 Alcatraz escape was not a tragedy, but rather a narrow but successful attempt at freedom. A great deal of emphasis is packed into this little line. The authorities mistakenly believed for a long time that Frank, John, and Clarence Morris had perished in the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay, but the letter confirms what many had suspected all along, that the men had lived, and it flat out disputes the official finding. With the FBI's 1979 conclusion of its investigation into the escapees, this claim of life takes on even greater significance. But the U.S., in order to encourage further speculation and investigation, the U.S. Marshals Service did not close the case. The letter's assertion only serves to solidify that rumor. Instead of merely stating that he survived, the author asserts that every single person did. Stories and accounts of seeing the men in later decades corroborate this. For example, the Anglin family reported receiving unsigned letters and flower gifts for years after the escape. There is a mountain of evidence suggesting the three individuals made it out alive. Not only what is in the letter, just under 24 hours following the escape, a raft that had been improvised and had a paddle was discovered on Angel Island. It appears that they might have touched down. A blue Chevrolet was stolen by three men that same night. For many years, the FBI withheld all of this data from the general population. The trio's escape plan, which consisted of landing, obtaining a car, and then vanishing, was a perfect match for the secret information and the letter's schedule. But barely. The author's terrifying words do suggest the difficulty and danger of the journey, but they also indicate that it was successful. With the narrow letter option, many unreliable eyewitness accounts are given more weight. Several reports of men in Brazil, Maryland, and Florida who matched the description of the escapees have taken on a much more plausible tone in light of this letter's context. What seemed like unfounded rumors at first may have been three Barely Club survivors among the strange attendees at the Anglin family funerals. Men sobbing at the coffin or strange-looking women in makeup. Whether or not John Anglin actually wrote the letter is an open question, but it does provide strong evidence that the escape was successful. Investigating the Anglin letter for legal purposes, the forensic expert was dispatched to federal authorities upon discovery of the 2013 letter purporting to be from John Anglin. U.S. and FBI officials were deeply concerned about the significance of the Alcatraz escape and the consequences of the escapees' survival. The document was read by the United States Marshals Service. The FBI laboratory examined the handwriting of the letter and found a match with samples taken from Frank Morris, John and Clarence Anglin, and themselves. The objective was to locate any documents belonging to the men that corresponded to the handwriting that had been discovered during their incarceration. Despite the exhaustive nature of the forensic investigation, the results were ultimately deemed inconclusive. The letter's authorship by John Anglin remains a mystery even to experts in the field of handwriting analysis. The absence of any detectable DNA or fingerprints on the paper rendered the letter unreliable as proof. Doubt and curiosity have resulted from this haziness. Some believe the letter's thorough content and lack of proof are sufficient to keep the chance alive, even though there isn't enough proof to say for sure that it isn't real. The term inconclusive is used in forensics to describe the lack of sufficient evidence to reach a just verdict. This does not imply that the evidence was worthless. The letter's antiquity, the poor quality of the handwriting sample, and the possibility that the writer had concealed or altered their handwriting style over the years added fuel to the fire of suspicion. John Anglin's identity could have shed light on one of the most infamous unresolved American prison escape mysteries if the letter had been identified as his. Although its meaning is unclear, the letter does bring up some pertinent concerns. The lack of conclusive evidence put the authorities in a difficult position. Lacking certainty regarding the letter's assertions, they were unable to conclude the case or take any action based on it. After the United States Marshals Service assumed responsibility for the case in 1978, it was still referred to as open. The forensic study was accepted, but they reiterated that no definitive answers had been derived from it. Because of this unanswered question, the possibility persists that the inmates of Alcatraz were able to escape from one of the most secure prisons in the United States.